Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I'm also the host of Moms Don't Have Time to Lose Weight, and I'm the editor of the anthology, which you should run out and buy, called Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. All proceeds of that book go to COVID-19 vaccine research. And I'm the editor-in-chief of Moms Don't Have Time to Write, a new publication on Medium, and we're accepting submissions, so please send your personal essays there. And if all that isn't enough, you can follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens, and my website is zibbyowens.com. Okay, now back to this amazing podcast. Listeners, if you enjoy this podcast, I promise you will love my new audiobook for Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. It's not about the quarantine, but a lot of the essays were written during that time about other things that moms don't have time to do or other busy people, things like reading, eating, working out, breathing, having sex, and 60 best-selling and notable authors wrote essays. All those authors have been on this very podcast. So if you like to listen to my conversations, if you want to get to know these authors better, I read the audiobook myself. Check it out on Audible, Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. Again, Audible audiobook. Go listen to it. It's like 60 mini podcasts. I hope you enjoy. Hanna Halperin is the author of Something Wild. She's a graduate of the MFA program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her stories have been published in the Kenyon Review, N+1, New Ohio Review, Joyland, and others. She has taught fiction workshops at Grub Street in Boston and worked as a domestic violence counselor. This is her debut novel. Welcome, Hanna. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss Something Wild.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, I literally had a dress, by the way, with this exact same pattern. I'm going to have to find it and send you a link or something. You can wear it to match your cover if you want. Okay, so this is your debut novel. It's really exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Could you tell listeners what Something Wild is about?
Yeah. Okay. So Something Wild is the story of two adult sisters, Nessa and Tanya Bloom, and they go home for the weekend to help their mother clean out their childhood house. And that weekend, they discover that their mother is in an abusive marriage with their stepfather. And they both have very different reactions to finding this out and different approaches to trying to get their mother to leave the relationship. And it ends up stirring up for the sisters this incident that happened to them when they were teenagers that they've never spoken about before.
Wow. Okay. So I know you have an MFA. Was this part of your program? Was this your thesis, or how did this whole thing happen?
Yeah, no, it wasn't my thesis, but I did write a short story while I was in Wisconsin in my MFA that was it was about these two teenage girls that, kind of had this traumatic incident happen. And this story just kind of stuck with me, and it was haunting me. And I knew that I wanted to do something more with it. So it was this story that I wrote back in 2015 that I kind of ended up expanding, and it eventually became the novel. So it did grow out of that time in Wisconsin.
Was the scene was with the girls, and his name was Daniel, right?
Yeah. It was the girls with Dan. But it was actually the story, the two girls were friends. They weren't sisters. And I ended up thinking, because the story was really about the fallout between the two girls, because, this traumatic thing happens. And it was really about the friendship between these two girls. And after this thing happens, the fallout between them. And I started asking myself if they were sisters, and you don't really have the same option to sort of go your separate ways. If you're sisters, sort of what happens to that relationship. So it became a story about sisters and family rather than just friends.
Wow. I mean, the scene that most sort of rattled me in the whole thing was the night of the abuse of the mother. And when they came to clean out the house and finding their mom sort of slumped over in the kitchen and her eyes are all bloodshot and having to take her to the hospital. And one of the sisters standing guard against the stepfather sort of coming back, and all the complicated feelings they have about the stepfather, because just earlier that day, one of them had been out for a walk, and, they're all desperate for approval at the same time, in a way, all children are of their parents. And yet what happens when that figure is so flawed? Anyway, I thought it was just so haunting to see a mom sort of in such a position of like weakness almost with her kids. Tell me about how that element of the story came to be, or what you were looking to explore, or anything about it.
Yeah, thanks. So, I was writing the story about sisters, and I became really interested in their mother. And, another piece of sort of, I guess, what was going on with me or my life sort of after the MFA is I took this job as a domestic violence counselor. And I started thinking a lot about how trauma and violence is passed down in families, from generation to generation. And, this was something that I was thinking and exploring a lot in my fiction, like sort of before I took a job as a domestic violence counselor. But in my job, I was sort of seeing that play out in stark ways that I hadn't maybe before. And so, I started asking a lot sort of about the Bloom family, like what was going on, what had they seen as girls, both kind of in these loud ways, but also in these very like subtle, insidious ways. And Nessa and Tanya have, like, as you said, very different perceptions of their stepfather, of their parents. And I was really interested in how two sisters could grow up in the same family, grow up with the same parents and the same step parents, and see them all so differently. Despite, I see Nessa and Tanya as very close, even though they have like a very complicated relationship. So that was something that I wanted the book to explore.
And also even the effects on their own sexuality and their relationships, and how they end up sort of navigating that after everything that's happened and what they've seen, and, sort of the self-destruction that can come with picking the wrong partner at times, or, not being fulfilled, or, working in the psychiatrist's office and like going through the files to snoop on a potential patient. And like, it's like, how could I find a worse suited person than like somebody who is like, unethically, that I shouldn't even like go for. And like, you already know their problem. Although maybe, I don't know, maybe it's better just to know going in what you're dealing with, as opposed to meeting a stranger in a bar and finding out.
Yeah. That was a very dysfunctional. There was many dysfunctional relationships in this book, but that was one of the ones that you saw right off the bat. Sort of, both of them were, using each other in various ways. But.
And I also really liked how, sorry, I'm just like sort of jumping around here, but I liked how you depicted the stepmom, and how at first, when she first sort of arrived and sitting in it wasn't a convertible, but in my head it is. So, yeah. But like sitting there to pick up the girls for one of their weekends, and how years later it turns out like that's someone that they felt comfortable, or one of them felt comfortable enough sort of confiding in, and the role of step parents. I don't know if you have step parents, or do you have step parents? I don't know.
I don't. My parents got divorced in the middle of me writing this book.
No.
Yeah. So, that was kind of strange for me, because the book is so much about divorce, and I had written most of the divorce scenes, and then my parents got divorced, and that sort of changed, I in a way I felt kind of closer to my characters after that happened. But the character of the stepmother, Simone, was someone who surprised me, like while I was writing it, because, at first I saw her the way that, Nessa and Tanya saw her, as sort of like an invader into their family. And then the more I wrote her, I started seeing her in this more three-dimensional way. And, first I saw her as sort of someone that, they project a lot of their anger and fantasies onto. And then she became, as you said, someone actually that, they can trust. And most of the adults in their life, they can't trust. And so she became, in a way, like all the characters are pretty flawed, but yeah, she was someone who I actually really enjoyed writing, because she kept surprising me as I was writing her.
Wow. I love when authors say that their characters surprise them, and you never know what they're going to do. And that's great. It was also interesting how the town itself changed, right? Sort of the bougie-ish, what's the word? Gentrification almost of, maybe that's the wrong word still, but how this tiny town outside Boston became like the hipster new hot place, and the people who had been there forever, how you have to cope with that. And that happens like all the time. I feel like all these neighborhoods keep changing, and, you know, there are all these old remnants, right? Or like a ranch house or a dilapidated this next to like the super trendy, I don't know, hot yoga studio or something. And how do the sort of townies, if you will, like deal with their town being taken over, and sort of examining that in all of their lives, really, but particularly the mom's as she like packs her bags and heads on out. Tell me about that sort of plot line.
Yeah, I mean, I chose to write it in Arlington, which is pretty close to where I grew up, and now I'm living, you know, very close by to Arlington. So like I you know, took a lot of walks around where I knew the Blooms grew up, and then I like chose the house that I was like, okay, they live here. And I would like take a lot of walks around their neighborhood. And I did a few interviews with people who have lived in Arlington for a long time, just to sort of get an idea of like, what did Arlington used to be like? And what is it like now? And, you know, did some research on how has Arlington changed. I mean, it was really interesting to find out sort of, how it's changed throughout the decades. And I wanted to, you know, give a sense of why Arlington was becoming not a viable place for Lauren and Jesse to stay anymore, but and what it had been like for them to grow up in that town.
It's so funny that you talk about picking a house, because I've noticed a bunch of authors do that. They have like a specific house in mind. Like I just interviewed Sunny Hostin, Summer on the Bluffs, and the book on the cover is one. She's like, oh yeah, I used to like walk around the house all the time. Like that was their house. And even like J. Courtney Sullivan said, like it was her old babysitter's house that she like described in detail. And I'm thinking about all these characters sort of wandering through these actual houses, and how it's almost like non-historical fiction, right? It's almost like, right? It's like modern day, it's like alternative reality in a way. It's like almost like we're all making up these imaginary friends.
Yeah.
All of a sudden I'm like, maybe I'm just talking to crazy people all day long.
it is a little nuts. Like, you know, it's all these like dramas going on, you know, in our minds. But it became, you know, I think actually the setting used to be, when I first wrote the novel, I didn't have much of a setting in the book. And that was something, you know, my editor, Allison, really, you know, she was like, I want more of a setting there. And that was something that kind of came out much more in revision. And I think it made the novel, I hope that it made the novel stronger anyway.
No, for sure. I mean, I feel like there's some books I pick up after I've read them, and I'm immediately like in that place. And this one was sort of in the neighborhood, and, you know, looking in the windows, and, you know, restaurants that have replaced ones that now you can't even like afford to go in. And I don't know, this whole neighborhood, even like the random guy on his little bike about to have that crash, this poor little boy. I don't know. I feel like this is very much like on the sidewalks of the town. And anyway, all to say, well done.
Yeah.
Did you always want to be a writer? Like, how did you end up? Did you know you wanted to be a novelist, or how did this? And how did you end up becoming a domestic violence counselor? That's like a very interesting choice of job after an MFA program.
I mean, I've always wanted to be a writer since, you know, I was like a little kid, and so yeah, I've always been writing, and I'm kind of, you know, blown away that it's actually happening. It's very exciting, and yeah, I mean, the domestic violence job, you know, I think at the time I felt that it was like, I think at the time I thought it was random. And now looking back, I don't think it was a random choice at all. And, you know, it was after my MFA, it was like close to the MFA ending. I remember I was like, what am I going to do? And I was, you know, Googling, I knew that I wanted to move to Martha's Vineyard. Again, I am not really sure why. I just had this dream of moving there at some point. And I Googled, you know, jobs on Martha's Vineyard, and this opening for a domestic violence position came up, and I decided to take it. And I moved there, you know, not really knowing what I was getting into. And I moved there alone, and it was just like very interesting. And I really like love the work. I'm still doing that now as part-time, and, you know, was writing alongside it. And I think it's something that, you know, yeah, I don't think it's like, it's random. I mean, I think like those are dynamics that I've explored in my writing. I think it's like it's impacted my life in ways. And yeah, I'm very grateful to be doing it. It's very humbling work. And yeah, that's.
Wow. That's really great you're doing that. It must take a lot out of you to have that immediacy, right? The people are calling the hotline, right? Like, the people who make that call are already at a certain point, right, in their journey. It's not just like survive, you have to get to that point it would take a lot, I would imagine.
Yeah. The work that I was doing on Martha's Vineyard, I was doing direct services. So I was working on a hotline, and the work that I'm doing now, I'm working in an abuser education program. So it's a program for abusers.
Oh my
we
gosh.
provide, counseling and education. And I'm in contact with, the partners and ex-partners of the abuser. So it's less direct services, but yeah, I find it like really, really meaningful and important work. And I guess I'm just very grateful to be doing it.
Have you had experience with violence in your own life in any way?
Yeah. I mean, and again, I think one thing that the book explores is, the book explores, very severe physical violence, but I'm, just as interested, in emotional violence and psychological violence. And I think one thing this job has taught me is like there's no hierarchy. And so I'm interested in all of that. And, I hope that the book opens up conversation and sparks conversation for, to discuss all of that.
And so what happened after you wrote this book? So have you started working on another book, or was there a long time of revisions, or like what happened after it sold, or tell me like the whole story?
Yeah. So, we sold this back, I think it was 2019. And then we did a lot of revisions on it, and I've been working on that. And then during quarantine, I wrote the first draft of another novel, and I'm really excited about that. And,
wow.
And that's what I've been working on now. And
good for you.
It's kind of a balancing act of, because now we're like very much, doing things for this novel. But I'm very excited to sort of be working on this second novel too.
And can you say anything about that one?
I guess what I can say about it is it's kind of like a portrait of a relationship, and it has to do with like addiction and codependency and obsession. And that's kind of where I'm at with it at this point.
Wow, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Awesome. So how do you feel with this novel, like coming out into the world after all this time and another novel? It's so exciting to be a debut author.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm like nervous. It's very surreal, to think of people reading it, and I'm excited, but I'm, kind of terrified as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
I think my advice would be to, figure out, to kind of get to know yourself as a writer and figure out like what are the conditions under which you write. And I think it's different for everyone. So if you're the kind of writer who writes best when you know that people are going to read your work, or you work best when you have deadlines, like figure out ways to give yourself deadlines, or, get some friends together and make a writing group or join a writing class. If I think a lot of people tend to write more when they're reading, especially when they're reading writers that like resonate with them, and it sort of like find those writers that like when you're reading them make you want to put down the book, so you start writing. Sometimes I think like we have to like almost play tricks on ourselves in order to get us to write, like convince ourselves like, okay, like our parents are never going to read this, or like certain people are never going to read this. And like almost sort of, you have to really get to know yourself to figure out like, okay, what are the things that are blocking me, or what are the things that are going to make it really happen? And then give yourself those things.
Love that. Did you end up having like regular times? Like what did you do? Like, what was your process like in writing it?
For me, I think I tend to have like pretty long, like periods of like intense productivity, and then followed by like long periods where I don't write at all. And then, so I know like when I'm having those really productive periods, like I just, that's like all I do. And I just go for it. And I don't really let things get in the way. I kind of make that the priority. And I'm someone who like does really, really well when I'm with a writing group. Like I love workshops. Like some people hate workshops, but I I like do really well when I know that I'm going to be reading other people's work and people are going to be reading mine. So like ever since college, like I've always been signing up for writing classes or getting friends together and writing groups. And that like really, really helps me. So I think for people, and for people who do well with that, I would recommend it.
Excellent. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Hanna. I'm going to go digging now for the dress so I can send you a picture.
Yeah, I love that.
You can like order it or something. Maybe you can expense it to your publisher. I don't know. Yeah. Well, I'm excited for you. And I think it's really awesome that you've chosen to spend your time helping other people in such a direct, meaningful way for like, honestly, all of society. And that's really amazing of you, especially as you have to deal with your own parents and your own family and your own writing and all of that. So I don't know. I think that's pretty awesome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you talking to me and reading my book. And thank you so much for having me.
No, it was great. It was really moving and memorable. It was really vivid. And the characters, I'm like ready to sort of write a little short story where I have your characters go meet some characters in some of these other books. And then I can like live in this make-believe world a little bit longer. Anyway, all right. Well, have a great day and good luck with everything as it unfolds and, enjoy the ride.
Thank you, Zibby.
Okay. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.